I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'm Rachel Killian. I am the Attleboro Historical Society's program chair, and each year we visit a sacred space. And since Murray was celebrating their 150th anniversary this year, we thought we would have our program here to start the year. If you haven't come to our programs before, there are some program sheets at the entrance, so if you want to grab one of those. And then after the program, we're going to move over to the John Murray room. We've got a little history set up in there. You can see some photographs of our ministers and then ask questions of myself or anybody else if you feel like they didn't get answered during the program. In February, we're going to be back at the Industrial Museum for Fighting City Hall, the Fair Tax Association. So Valerie Coates is going to talk about the taxpayer uprising. I don't know if that's a fair way to put it, but in the 40s and 50s, people were really paying attention, and in the 60s, they really put up a fight with how things were reassessed in the city. Our March date is still being worked on, so we've got 2 Saturdays that the VFW is choosing from, so we're going to have a Saturday afternoon program where you can see the VFW, hear about some of the programs they're doing, and learn a little bit about the history of the VFW. On April 17th, we'll be back at the Industrial Museum where Amanda Blout is going to talk about her book, Meet Me at the Biltmore. And on May 10th, which is a Saturday, we're going to do the Hike Attleboro Downtown Loop that the Land Trust has put together. So that's a walking trail, but it is a 3-mile walk. So we're going to meet at the library where people can park and use the restroom if needed. And so if you're up for all or part of that, that's May 10th. And then on June 19th, Petty Diaz is going to present on Robert Slater, who was a well-known caterer in Attleboro. And those are our upcoming programs. So thank you for coming tonight. I'm going to introduce the president of Murray Church, Russet Morrow, to say a few words about the church organization.
Thank you, Rachel. And I would very much like to welcome the Attleboro Historical and Preservation Society to this, our most sacred space of Murray Unitarian Universalist Church of Attleboro. I am Russet Morrow. I'm the chair of the executive committee of the church and president. Now for some housekeeping information. The bathrooms are straight down this hall, all the way down on the left. At the back of the church, we have supplies if you need any tissues, cough drops, water, should you need anything. Could people from this church just raise your hand or stand up for a minute? So if you need anything, grab any of these folks and they can tell you where it is. At this time, I'd like to ask you to please turn off any devices that might go zip, zap, or ring. All right, I did that just before I came up. So Rachel asked me to talk a little bit about the governing structure of our church. All Unitarian Universalist churches practice congregational polity. This is a system of church governance where the local congregations are totally autonomous and self-governing. This also means that each congregation figures out its own governing structure for their church, for their own church, and changes it through changing the bylaws as needs of the members change. Ours has changed twice in the 45 years that I've been attending here. Currently, in our case, the executive committee, of which I'm chair, is responsible for the operations side of running the church. We report directly to the congregation. Our executive board consists of president, vice president, clerk, and treasurer. These are all the officers of the church and the only people that may sign any legal documentation on behalf of the church. In addition, the board also has a chair of trustees that handles the trust fund, 2 at-large members that handle, right now they're handling big projects, the transition project and a future capital fund drive project. We have a finance chair, a program chair, council chair that works with all committees, and the minister is an ex officio member of the executive board. At Murray Church, the minister has full authority to control or change anything within the sanctuary here. The minister directs and performs all pastoral care with help and advice of the caring committee. The minister works closely with the director of music, and besides our beautiful, beautiful tracker organ, We have a choir, we have band instruments, we support a Murray Jazz Band with vocal accompaniment, along with an active music committee. The minister also works very closely with the director of religious exploration, I believe other churches call it religious education, which has active Friday night evening family fellowship services, where we have a lot of families that come and do something fun on Friday night. The minister is the direct supervisor of our office administrator with help and support of the executive board, and the minister is the ex officio member of the executive board, as well as all other church committees except the nominating committee and the committee of auditors. The president is an ex officio member of all committees, including the nominating committee. The minister also has influence in the operation of the church by being our only full-time staff member, and the minister is the public face of our church in an official capacity. The president of the church, with the help and advice of the executive board, and we're all volunteers, has the final word on the operational side of the church and is the CEO. Thus, from experience, I can tell you that running this church is, on occasion, like herding a large group of cats. Everyone has an opinion on most topics, and we practice a lot of patience and tolerance, and I wouldn't change it for the world. We do have an overall umbrella connection with the larger UU community of over 1,000 churches in the US and more around the world. We do this through the Unitarian Universalist Association, who helps with their expertise, their guidance, their recommendations of help when individual congregations need it. And the UUA has a service organization worldwide. As I mentioned earlier, we practice congregational polity. Theoretically, we could hire any minister we want, as long as 51% vote approval. But from the many years of experience, the UUA guidelines recommend that when we hire a minister, the voting membership must endorse the selection of the vote by 90 to 95% approving. There are some variations in this system that allow for a slightly lower approval rate of 85% under certain circumstances, but basically, the UUA experience has proved that less than this shows enough dissension about the minister to cause future problems. And a good minister won't accept a ministerial role with less than 85% or 90% of the votes. We have a long history of being involved in social justice issues, and as shown by our Black Lives Matter and our LGBTQ plus flags out front, again, these have been voted on by the congregation. We are known for our involvement in social justice, and there are a lot more examples, but this is probably enough for tonight. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our minister, the Reverend F. Vernon Wright V, also known as Reverend Vern.
Well, thank you, Russet, and thank you, Rachel, and thank you all for being here tonight. It's really important work that you do in gathering, preserving, and understanding the history of our city and helping others to do that. Some of you might know me from when I served Second Congregational Church, UCC, which founded the city of Attleboro. But did you know that the Second Church was in turn founded by Old Town Congregational Church in North Attleboro, which in turn was founded by Newman Congregational Church in Rumford, Rhode Island. And this goes all the way back to the 1600s. So churches can shape places. They can. But now I serve this church. And some of my own history in serving other churches have made me appreciate a little more what this place is and the uniqueness of it. Over 150 years ago, when you lived in Attleboro, you could become a member of one of the Protestant churches, or you could be a member of the Catholic Church. Around that time, I believe, and maybe a little bit later than that, Agudas Achim started, sort of like a Jewish fellowship started to emerge. but I can't remember precisely the date of that. But 150 years ago, each church was well established, and it was pretty tribal back then. And if you were wanting to make a name for yourself and you didn't belong to one of these churches, it was hard to do that. But then something happened. The Industrial Revolution, which had started earlier, began to flourish, particularly in Attleboro, which before then had been more of an agricultural community. And there were some people who had begun to amass a fortune, and they became interested in running the town politics and influencing the town. But they were not really accepted in the established churches. So they decided to establish their own. And Universalism was a kind of church that began to emerge in the 1750s. And it appealed to some of the people that were living in Attleboro. And it was, they tended to be smaller churches. They tended to be lay-led churches by and large, not very much top-down. And it was had a more relaxed theology. It was less dogmatic. It was more egalitarian, recognizing the potential of people, regardless of the families that they might have been born into. And Murray was born, Murray Church. Now, early on when I started serving this church, your colleague here and the member of Murray, Rachel, took me on a tour, and she'll show pictures of that tour that she gives. It kind of shows the very humble beginnings of the church, kind of like a little fellowship in a dance hall someplace, And then it grew, and they built a church right in the heart of downtown Attleboro. She'll show you pictures of that. And then eventually they rebuilt here. But what is Unitarian Universalist Church as a sort of ethical and faith-based organization? That's what I'm here to really answer. So let me just start with a joke to kind of situate you in our tradition. What do you get when you cross a Unitarian Universalist with a door-to-door salesman? Well, somebody who enthusiastically shows up at your doorstep, but when you let them in, they have no idea why they're there. I think what strikes people as funny about this is, if you look on this side of the wall, you see the symbol for Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity. There's Unitarian University, there's Judaism, Taoism, Wiccan, humanism, Islam. There's a lot of people in the church that don't even believe in God. And that's okay, because you can have an ethical understanding of like how to treat one another. And as long as you treat one another well, then it's okay. I quickly found out that this church knows exactly what it's about. And we say it in the covenant every Sunday. Love is the spirit of this church. Service is a law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. If you can agree to those things, it doesn't matter to us what you believe. Dig a little deeper, though, and you'll see the true history of the church kind of reflected in these stained glass windows, which came from the original building in downtown Attleboro. That was established as a Universalist church. And Universalist church had a symbol, kind of a circle, and then a cross on the lower left quadrant, meaning that Christianity was important, but didn't tell the whole, wasn't the whole picture. That other faiths could be considered, that other creeds could be considered, and that God worked in the world through acts of love and compassion, and that is, if we all work together in acts of love and compassion, we would be doing God's will on earth. John Murray is considered the American father of Universalist thought. And he came to the country, he was shipwrecked off the coast of New Jersey. And he had been a Methodist minister who got into trouble for being too liberal and inclusive. And he was cast out. And then his family died of a disease, and he was sent to debtor's prison. He got out, and he vowed he would never preach on the gospel again, and he would lose himself in America, and he was on the verge of suicide. Actually, he got shipwrecked, and he was kind of saved by a passing ship and then taken to shore, and there was all kinds of strange events. He ended up in this particular shore, and it happened to belong to one of the only Universalists in the world at that time, who had built a Universalist chapel on his property and was looking for a Universalist minister. And this guy, before he was put into debtor's prison and he was cast out of the Methodist Church, had declared himself a Universalist. He ended up being a chaplain in George Washington's Continental Army. And he ended up moving up to the Boston area. He served a church in Gloucester, Massachusetts. But he was an iconoclast, and he was really kind of in your face. And his theory of universal salvation, that it didn't, he'd say, in order to mop a floor, you don't have to wait for the floor to declare itself clean and pure before you start mopping it. That's the way God works in the world. Right? And so, that was, something he could get in trouble for. Like when he was preaching in Boston, somebody threw a rock at him and nearly missed his head. He bent over, picked up the rock, lifted it up, and he said, "This is solid and weighty, but it is neither rational nor convincing." So as the Unitarians and the Universalists merged in 1961, this Universalist church became also Unitarian and began, indeed, it also sort of had assumed other Unitarian churches into it, as it, some of them, it would be maybe a small fellowship, and a lot of people weren't as interested, so they just would kind of join in with Murray because Murray was larger and had some good economic backing. So the Unitarians, though, are really important part of the church. The Unitarians were the ones who took over Harvard Divinity back in the first years of the 1800s. And they had felt that churches had become too dogmatic and legalistic. And they wanted to emphasize Jesus' human ministry and ethics. And they saw that the doctrine of the Trinity was not actually in the Bible, but invented by the church later. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a Unitarian minister who wrote the enormously impactful essay called The Oversoul, presented God as an eminent creative force, described as much by the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads as the Gospels. He taught that nature, not books, had the final say in revealing the true nature of God, divinity. He in turn had tremendous influence on people like Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Teresa May Alcott, who in turn influenced people like Walt Whitman, who would influence people like Allen Ginsberg and the rest of the Beats. If you want to know more about the Transcendentalists, I invite you to take a walk one day in our nature trail behind the church, and they have kind of the sayings of the Transcendentalists, and you can get a sense of their views of nature and humanity. Unitarians also embrace the ideas of the humanists, who began to teach that it is not so much what you believe in and how you treat other people. There's a sizable group at our church that do not believe in God at all, but they're very devoted humanists. They tend to be very kind. They devote themselves to the betterment of the human race, and that's fine. And that's great. That's what it's all about anyway. We are a historic church in the Attleboro community with our roots in Universalism and a great affiliation to Unitarianism. We have been the progressive edge of religion in town since the beginning. The Black Lives Matter banner, the progressive pride flag do not go back too many years, but the inclusive liberal spirit goes back a long way. For instance, many of the older members of this church remember being the first church in town to perform Jesus Christ Superstar back in the 70s, an act so controversial that opposed churches actually showed up for several Sundays in a row to picket the church. The central symbol of the Unitarian Universalist Church is the chalice. And let me see if I have a lighter to light it for you. And if you can see above, you see this kind of light. It originally was an ancient oil lamp, right? And this is indeed an oil lamp here. And basically it symbolizes that though we may define this light in many different ways, in our own unique ways, we're all seekers of the light, and we are all gathered to learn more about the light. So that, with the kind of embrace of the idea of universal salvation, the embrace of humanism, the idea that there's many ways of defining the divine, gives you a little insight into an important community that has been in this city 450 years. And it has had an influence, I think. I know that this is a small congregation in the shape of the many other congregations in town. And I don't mean to say that this is the strongest or the most important voice of any of the traditions in the town, but it has left its mark on the city. And it's part of the history of what we are together. So thank you for being here tonight. May all of our traditions continue to thrive together as we make this city a really great place to live in.
All right, I hope you can see the screen. Mine's a little bit more of a pictorial history of the church and its time here. And like a lot of Attleboro stories, it starts in what is technically today North Attleboro before the split. So the Universalists began having services in Attleboro as early as 1816 and held their services in Newell's Tavern in Old Town. We know they acquired the land across the street by 1818, and this is the 1832 map, which shows the first Universalist church there. And it's just south of the Old Town Church, the first Congregationalist church in Attleboro. But sometime around 1841, they moved to the center of town, which is the center of North Attleboro town. All the while, the East Attleboroans were making the trek over there. So it's about 4 miles to Old Town. And then when they moved to Washington Street, it was about 4.5 miles. So this is the 1832 map again. I'm sorry, the 1850 map. Yes. There it is. So in 1882, the cornerstone was laid for the church that many of you might remember in North Attleboro, located at the corner of Washington and Church Street in North Attleboro, commonly known as the Community Church. And that's the Community Church there. But tired of traveling to North Attleboro, a group of East Attleboro members paid to have the North Attleboro Universalist minister, Reverend J.D. Pierce, and a few other ministers travel to East Attleboro to preach a few times a month. By May of 1875, Reverend Pierce was regularly preaching at Union Hall for a growing number of Universalists on the east side of town. Union Hall had businesses on the first floor, and on the second floor was an open space or hall used for various functions. Reverend Van was talking about dance halls. There are stories that performances held on Saturday nights sometimes left peanut shells on the floors that were still there to be crunched on during the Sunday services. It's here that Murray Universalist Society held their services from May to December of 1875. And there were a few other fledgling churches in town that also held services here before they were able to gather up enough to build their own churches. So if you didn't recognize those old pictures of Union Hall, maybe you recognize Atherton's. Again, I feel like a true New Englander, citing places that are no longer there, or well, the building is there. So this is the back side of Atherton's in the back part of Morin's parking lot. So this is from the Railroad Ave side of it. So that's what Union Hall is. So after Reverend Pierce's service on May 16, 1875, a committee was created to look into holding regular services over the summer in East Attleboro. On Saturday, May 22nd, a second meeting was held at Union Hall to begin raising funds for a minister. The campaign was a huge success and raised nearly all the money they needed to secure their own clergyman. On June 19, 1875, it was decided that the new church would be called Murray Universalist Parish in honor of Reverend John Murray. Shortly after, the new church elected officers, and 53 members signed its original constitution and bylaws, and I have a copy of that on display in the John Murray room for after. In December 1875, they moved into a new building that would be at 40 North Main Street, built by Edward J. Horton. Here, their chapel would remain for almost 10 years while they raised money and they grew their parish. The first floor was a bakery. The second was where the church was, and the third floor was the Temple of Honor, which was a temperist group. So here's the Horton building. It's across the street from the Methodist Church on North Main Street and Sanford Streets. The 1878 pictorial map is a little hard to read because the steeple from the Methodist Church is kind of blocking the building. And then you can see the footprint of it. Here's a picture from, the picture says 1850s, my car people, maybe you can take a closer look at that. So here's a picture of the Horton building. I think it looks more like the 1930s than the 1950s, but maybe some car people can help me out. And again, this center of town is maybe almost unrecognizable. So again, this is across from the Methodist Church, the YMCA, and the telephone building is still there, so maybe you recognize the Balfour telephone building in that picture. Or you recognize it as it is today, Eastern Supply Company. So I think that's how most of us see it. So after raising funds, the land was purchased at the juncture of Main and County Streets, so in that weird little triangle in the cluster of streets at the center of Attleboro. So the land was purchased in 1881 for $2,000. Ground was broken on October 1884, and the cornerstone was laid on December 1884. This is the location that's across from Morin's Diner, and it's the current Mulaney Twins parking lot, again, if you're trying to visualize it. And again, it's hard to believe if you look at the point of that intersection. It's not just Murray Church that will be built there, but Dr. Sanford's house is at the corner, and that's where there's kind of the little park and monument right now. An official... There we go. So here is the Queen Anne style church that was designed by architects Gould and Angel out of Providence and built by local builder William Goff, also a Murray member. And although the church was completed in 1885, an official dedication ceremony did not take place until a few years later in 1887 when all the bills were paid in full. And that amount was $14,000. Murray Church continued to grow, and in 1908, Murray Hall was added to the west side of the building to provide more classroom spaces for religious education. It was squeezed in between the fire station, now the Larson Senior Center, and the church. So if you look at the building on the left side, you can see it's a little more open. On the right side, you can kind of see that half turret where that addition was added. And then here's a colorized postcard showing the building sometime after 1908. And again, you get just a little glimpse of the fire station and the hose tower, and on the right side, that kind of brown edge, that's Dr. Sanford's house. I have a few pictures of the outside, or quite a few pictures of the outside, but for as busy a place as it was, I have very few pictures of the interior of the old building. So this photo is from 1899. It's the earliest one I have, and it's decorated for the wedding of Harvey Clapp to Ruth Wilmarth. Here's another interior photo, and in this one you can see the background. In the background, the stained glass windows, which will make their way over to the church. And then also, if you look in between in the wooden edges, you'll see the sconces. I have one of those on display as well for later. This picture is about 1948. So this is the picture that we posted on Facebook for the publicity, and we got a few comments on it. So again, if anybody knows anything, please let me know. But somebody noticed right in that center on the pole that there's a civil defense logo, and it says, there's the civil defense logo, then it says 501, and then underneath it, it just says alternate. Anybody know what that means? The person on Facebook said that the civil defense used to meet in the basement of the fire station, the Larson Senior Center. So another little history mystery for me to look into. But like a lot of things, time takes its toll on buildings, but the hurricanes of 1938 and 1954 really contributed to the demise of the church on South Main Street. It's said that on windy days, the road had to be blocked off as the belfry swayed in the wind. Does someone remember that? In addition, the foundation, the roof, parking issues all forced the congregation to begin looking for a new home. So again, in this picture, you can see all three of those stained glass windows really well on that side, and those are the ones that are transferred here, and I'll talk a little bit more about them when we get inside. And in 1954, the members voted to purchase the lot just 1 mile north of the intersection here at 505 North Main Street, and they purchased that from Olive Daggett Sheffield, so again, a name some might recognize from the Daggett Crandall home across the street. That was the Daggett Sheffield family property. A more modern church was designed, and ground was broken on March 24th, 1957. After this new church was complete in December, then the old building was razed. And so by February of 1958, that lot was vacant, and the city bought it to put in a comfort station, which is a nicer way to say a public bathroom. So again, this is the late 1950s, early 1960s. So again, a place in Attleboro people remember. You remember?
In the photograph, with the street sign that says 152, there's a boulder with a marker on it. Where is that today, and what was on the marker?
So that is still there. That is the Charles O. Fisk, sorry, I gotta get the O in there, Charles O. Fisk Memorial, and it is still there. There's still kind of a little grassy wedge in there, so that monument is still there, and I believe World War I monument. So back, now that the old church is knocked down, we gotta get to how they built this one. So on March 24th, 1957, Murray broke ground on its new home, and this is a flyer from that groundbreaking. And so again, many of the Murray people here might recognize them, but these were also big figures in Attleboro. So the little kindergartner is Ruth Clark, Ruth Moulton. So some of you might remember her. Ruth is a longtime member of the church, and she's the daughter of Richard, Dick, and Betty Clark. And Betty was a member of a lot of historical organizations in town, and she was the Murray historian before I got here. Up on the right, we've got Virginia Halco. Again, Halco is another old Attleboro name, and that's Reverend John Wood with her. On the bottom left, we've got Lester Nerney. He's the chair of the building committee that would move the building to the new location, and the Nerney name will come up again. Leonard Lamb, who's the moderator and president at the time. And then on the right, you've got Frances Bottomley. She was the oldest living member of Murray Church at the time, and she would have the honor of snuffing out the candle at the last service at the South Main Street Church, and then light the candle for the first service in this church. And then finally on the right is probably our most famous member. That is an older Mayor Harold Sweet, Attleboro's first mayor. So the Sweet family were longtime Murray members. Although traditional New England church designs were pitched for the new church, a modern and ultimately less expensive building was designed by local architects, Washburn, Luther, and Associates. DeMeo Construction of Providence was chosen as the builder. So not long into construction, you can already start to recognize the familiar shape of the curved roof of the sanctuary and the height of the campanile. The campanile, a lot of people think that was meant to be the bell tower. It was not. It was always meant to just be a beacon of light. In this view, you can see you're looking right through the sanctuary, out what will become the front windows. And you can see the 34-foot parabolic arches all around us. They're made from a laminated spruce. They slightly slowed down construction. One of the orders caught on fire during shipment, and so they had to reship them. And then as you zoom in on that same image, there's the 3 gaps in the wall/ceiling. I never know quite how to describe those, and that's part of the bump out where the stained glass windows from the old building will be installed. The roof is made of tongue and groove cedar. There's not much between the roof and the outside, or the ceiling and the outside. And in September, when enough of the building was done and the campanile was almost finished, they laid the cornerstone. And so they had a ceremony to install 2 cornerstones into the campanile. So before the South Main Street building was torn down, Lester Nerney retrieved a time capsule from the cornerstone block of the old building. Unfortunately, much of it had degraded, so there wasn't much to take out of it. And on September 30th, they placed the old 1884 capstone, so the red sandstone, and then a new granite 1957 stone into the campanile. And so I'm not sure if it was too dark for you to see those on the way in, but those are the 2 cornerstones in the campanile. So you may have noticed that at this point, I've only talked about the Universalists, so it was Murray Universalist Church and not the Unitarians yet, but the Unitarians were here in town. And so in 1907, Pilgrim Church built their church at the corner of North Main Street and Peck Street. Unfortunately, they were only there for about 20 years before fire damaged a big portion of the building, and they were just never able to regroup. They did later sell the church, and today it's home to All Saints Episcopal Church, so that building is still there on North Main. Dwindling numbers forced Pilgrim to disband, but many members joined Murray in 1955, and they brought funds from the sale of their church to Murray, which greatly contributed towards the new building at 505 North Main Street. And our campanile is dedicated in memory of their generosity. In 1962, that's when officially Murray would vote to join the newly formed Unitarian Universalist Association, a movement which was happening worldwide, and hence our new name, Murray Unitarian Universalist Church. Over the week of December 22nd through December 29th, 1957, Murray Church was dedicated, and the services were transferred from the old church to the new church. The cost of the new church was $243,000. This postcard was likely taken sometime in the spring of 1958, not long after the church was built. And then here's another early photograph, again sometime around 1960. There's no front parking lot, so many of you parked up front. That wouldn't come till much later. No sidewalks on North Main, those would come even later, but that little rock is still out there, so I love that rock. When I pull out, I look at it every time. But like our old church, this building only consisted of the section from the sanctuary down to the thrift shop. So if you haven't been to our thrift shop, that was the original end of our church, and we were a growing congregation. So in 1966, Murray broke ground for the classrooms and Unity Room addition, which are on the east side of the church. And again, architects, Luther Washburn and Associates, were hired to design the new wing. Here is a picture from that groundbreaking, and I like this picture not just because it shows so many Murray congregants in there that some might still recognize, but in the background of that larger picture, you can see the Boy Scout house. And again, it's another kind of piece of Attleboro history that a lot of people remember from the property. The building is no longer there. The chimney for it is still there, but this Boy Scout house was built in memory of Ralph Kent Jr. His father, Dr. Kent Sr., was an integral part of the Attleboro health system and community health. He was the health officer for a long time in the city. So now I want to take you to the inside part of the window, and stained glass windows are not really well lit at night for a night program, so I've got some photographs of those. But I will say that this is probably my favorite part of Murray Church, not just the stained glass windows. Not that I don't listen to the minister or the choir, but I spend a lot of time looking around, as I'm sure many people do in their various religious buildings. And so I spend a lot of time staring at those windows, and I do love them. So the stained glass windows, as we mentioned, were brought from the South Main Street from the South Main Street Church, and although they're not in the original design plans, they are early to the original building. We don't have an exact installation date for them, but again, sometime in the 1890s, likely. So if you look down at the windows or the pictures, the first window is the Sower. So it's dedicated in memory of Charles Edward Hayward, who died in 1886. A lot of you from town might remember his grandson, Charlie Hayward, named after his grandfather. But Charles Edward the Sr. was a founding member of Murray. The window was given in memory by Mrs. Joseph Lyman Sweet for her father. So you may know her better as Florence Hayward Sweet, as in the name of the clubhouse, and the mother of Harold Sweet, Attleboro's first mayor. The center window is the Good Shepherd, and that's given in memory of Louis Jacob Lamb and his wife Elizabeth Beckett Lamb, both early members of the church. Among his many church roles, Louis was on the building committee for the South Main Street Church and was a Sunday school superintendent for many years. Elizabeth Beckett herself was an early signer of Murray Church before her marriage to Louis. The furthest from the altar, that's the Good Samaritan, given in memory of Charles C. Wilmarth and his wife Mary A. Wilmarth, by Frank J. Ryder. Frank was the treasurer for the Walter E. Hayward Company, one of Charles Wilmarth's company, which he was the president. Charles and Frank worked together for many years as trustees of Murray Church. Like the others, the Wilmarths were dedicated supporters of Murray and very influential in town. So if you look up at the lights above you, these Gothic pendants were from the old church, so they brought them down and later on relit them. But there were also matching wall sconces from the old church. I have one of them to show you, and they were in the background of one of those pictures. But they are now the lights that are on either side of what was the Nobby Crafter. It's the Willard Blackington House, not the Blackington Inn, but across the street of Blackington Village, the former Nobby Crafter factory and the home to the Nerney family. And again, the Nerney families, plural, so Lester and Gladys, and then later their son Bill and Ruth were very active Murray members on just, I would say, too numerous a number of boards and committees. They were avid photographers, so a lot of the pictures we have are from them. They hosted functions. Ruth Nerney was the historian of the church for many years, and she was involved in the Historical Society and Commission in Attleboro for many years. But flanking either side of the front door are two of those stained glass sconces that originally came from the South Main Street Church. The altar table up front came from the old church as well. Originally, it was placed in the John Murray Room. The John Murray Room, when it first fruition, was as a small chapel. So this was the main sanctuary, and the John Murray Room was a small chapel, and they used that, continued to use that as an altar table. when they built the new church, the altar at the back, which is made of birch that matches all of this furniture that was up front. Now in the picture, hiding behind the screen is the organ. We've since removed that. I didn't put a slide in of the organ because it doesn't need one. So from its beginning, Murray always had an organ. I have an 1875 organ fund. This is not it, although it is quite old. Initially, there was a modern organ that was installed in our modern church, but it did not stand the test of time. And so a devoted committee researched and found this historic 1882 Hook and Hastings organ in Ohio. And after some restoration and some altar remodeling, it was installed here in 1892, 110 years after it was built. I mean, 1992, 92, thank you. 1882, it was constructed. 1992, it found its way here. And so maybe if we're lucky, when we're in the John Murray room, we'll hear it being played and we'll hear some choir practice. Remember that North Attleboro church I mentioned, the first Universalist church, community church that I started with? It suffered that same kind of plight that we did. Dwindling numbers, a large old building that just deteriorated and needed a lot of work. And in 1980, the church closed, and in 1981, they officially merged with us, but our front sign was dedicated in honor of community church. So kind of another piece of our history. This side table over here, again, I didn't put a slide in because I thought it would be easily visible. That was part of their altar service at Community Church. And you can't really see it, it's hard to see, but on the side it says, "In remembrance of me," and I just think that's a nice way to remember our first Universalists. We have 2 baptismal fonts. I had to look if I was allowed to call them baptismal fonts because we don't perform baptisms here. We do child dedications, but we do use water in them, and the internet said it was okay to call them baptismal fonts. So there's a marble one at the back, and then there's one hiding back here that's made of wood. The wooden one is our original one, and that was a gift of Dr. Wilfred Ellsworth Roundsville, and given by his family in 1950, so that came over with us from the old church. And then the marble one is their font from the First Universalist Church in North Attleboro. Reverend Burns already pointed out the symbols, and so at first our church, in some of the pictures you may have noticed, the cross is at the front of the church, and in the sanctuary there was a large cross. And then that started to transition. They tried out a few other symbols, so it was the cross, the chalice, and the Star of David. And then at the front of the altarpiece, we had a few more of the world religious symbols. And then slowly they have migrated, and just the chalice symbol has stayed. So our newest one, I believe, is the humanist symbol. I'm looking at my humanists out there. And the bell tower that was swaying in the wind, the bell from that is still here. And again, it might have been a little too dark for you to see it when you pulled up, but in our memorial garden, the bell has been a decoration there, I don't want to call it that, but symbol there. And inscribed on it is Murray Universalist Society, Attleboro, first organized June 19th, 1875. And so that's when we will officially celebrate the 150th anniversary of the church. Now it is, I would say, the entrance piece to our memorial garden. So this June we'll celebrate our 150th birthday, and we are an active, welcoming congregation who came together to maintain an environment that promotes spiritual growth for individuals, families, and affirms the diversity of belief. We reach out in a caring way within our church and beyond, and we are committed to building a more loving community in Attleboro and beyond. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. How's my time? 6:22. All right, I'm 8 minutes ahead of schedule. Maybe we can do Q&A in here for a few minutes. Does anybody have a question that my team of Murray members can answer? No? Oof, you guys are good. All right, if you have a few minutes and you want to stay, across the room I've got some more artifacts out on display, and I can answer any questions that people have. Thank you.
I would just say that Memorial Garden, maybe allude a little bit more as to what that is.
So a memorial garden is a place where you can have your name added to a memorial stone, or you could have your ashes interred there, or some of your ashes interred there. They don't have to be all in there. Were my memorial guard people? How'd I do? So to remember Murray members. Thank you all for coming.